checking to make sure it was afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for making yourselves available for this. As you well know, we've introduced a piece of legislation building on the order in council that we put in place 2 or 3 weeks ago now. The order in council is specific to grain only, trying to move a big chunk of that mountain right through to the coast to address the 50-some boats that are sitting there costing us tons of money, or you as farmers tons of money every day. Building on that, the order in council is a bit of a blunt instrument. It doesn't let us do corridor by corridor or different things like that, but it does start to ramp up the capacity of the railways. Last week, stats show that they were in that 4,400 car each range, so they're building to that 5,500 that they say they can do on a continual basis without interfering with other commodities. And that's why we've accepted that number, because we don't want to incent one and disincent others. Everybody needs their capacity requirements. The problem that we have is that we don't seem to see them building their capacity. So this legislative package is an umbrella. It was introduced on Wednesday. I've been doing roundtables like this across the country, meeting with as many of the shippers as possible. The railways would have you believe that it's only grain that's under duress at this point, and yet every time I talk to another bulk commodity shipper, they're saying the same thing. Maybe not to the same degree, but the same type of problems, and getting worse, not better, with no end in sight. So as we build our resource economy in Canada, as we do these free trade agreements around the world, we cannot have a weak link in the supply chain. And if we do, then there has to be some sort of reciprocity that says if you're the one causing the problem, you're the one who pays. You can't just offload it on down, in most cases, to the farm gate or back to the mine or whatever. So we're very cognizant of that. The legislative piece, it's emergency legislation, which lets us to move very, very quickly. A year is fast in political circles. We had our first meeting early January, as we saw the railways not pick up again after Christmas. There's always that lull. And we started having these roundtable discussions that gave us the order in council, and now has given us a framework for the legislation. It's an umbrella, and what it does then is plug in regulations on each one of the areas that we want to talk about, because it's much more flexible and nimble. And it allows us to then work with you to develop those regs. And I watched in the media where, of course, the opposition and some of the media who like to cause problems are saying, there's nothing in the legislation. No, it's an umbrella. The meat and potatoes are in the regs, and they're there because they are flexible and nimble and will allow us to adjust as we move along. There's a number of legs within that legislative regulatory piece that we can discuss at the table, and I'm happy to take your questions on that. But the cornerstone is service level agreements. That has to be something that everybody starts to take seriously to get the railways to the table to start to address those shortcomings. And they will do their best in the next little while to hive everybody apart again. I know on Bill C-52, the Crop Logistics Working Group that advises me on grain logistics, with the end of the single desk of the Canadian Wheat Board, we knew there would be some logistical questions, so we put that together. That helped us. The first year went exceptionally well. This year, large crop, lousy winter, whatever excuse the railways want to use, they haven't stepped up like they should. So we take this very seriously, but we want to take direction from all commodity shippers on the regulatory package as to how that works in your best interest. If we can deliver 75 or 80%, that's probably as close as government will ever get when we have to look at the balance that we need, but certainly we're here to take your direction in that regard. So I want to welcome Verlin Olson here as well. He's the Minister in Alberta for Agriculture, a very important aspect in Alberta, the same as it is, of course, in the prairies. The interswitching changes that we've made, we'll have a little discussion on that too, only pertain to the prairies because that's where the railways have some distance in between and it actually makes sense. But the SLAs are for all commodities, and the interswitching is for all commodities as well. The SLAs are for all commodities Canada-wide. So we'll be having meetings in Montreal on containers and all sorts of things, intermodal and so forth. So I welcome Verlin here. I've had the great pleasure of having the ag ministers at each one of the meetings that I've had across the country. We'll end up in Vancouver, I think, sometime next week as well, now that the port truck strike is done. We won't get blockaded out of there. I know one of the key things that I'm supposed to talk about is managing your expectations. Sky's the limit. Tell me what you need, and then we'll tone it back from there. Okay? So we'll just go around the table, introduce yourselves, and then we'll just open the floor to discussions. Verlin, do you have any introductory remarks?
No, thanks a lot for being here, Jerry, and I really appreciate your responsiveness to this issue. We've been hearing a lot from our producers, as I know other ministers have across the West. I'll just make two or three quick points. I'll try to be quick. One is, just for your interest, one of the staffers in my department sent me an excerpt from the annual report from our ministry in 1906. And it talked about the frustration of farmers not being able to get their grain to market because of issues with railways. The other thing it talked about in that report was the fantastic opportunity they had for markets in the Orient. So it's interesting that over 100 years later, we're talking about the same kind of issues. And I know that our position for our government has been for some time that it was going to be necessary to have some regulatory intervention by the federal government because we do have a monopoly or a duopoly, and there's no time soon are we going to be building half a dozen railways past each elevator in the prairies, on the prairies. And I know our position was back when the rail freight review was being done prior to 2010. At that time, we had surveyed shippers across all commodities, and at that time, you told us that the satisfaction rate with the rail service was at about 20%. So we felt then that the regulatory intervention was needed, and we're very happy that Jerry and his colleagues are responding with some intervention.
Good, thank you, Ron.